Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with me on Soulful Conversations with Madhuri Govindu. I do have the beautiful April Martini, and April, thank you for being here with us. To introduce April to those who don't know her, she has an army background. So, April has been a US Army veteran, TEDx speaker. She's also a private advisor and the author of the most anticipated forthcoming book, Authentic to What? I'm just waiting for that book right now. After serving about like 6 years on active duty, she was also deployed to Baghdad and she was on service on the personal staff of the Chief of Staff of the United States Army at the Pentagon. She spent nearly 2 decades leading teams in high growth corporate environments before launching her advisory and speaking practice. Today, her work focuses on helping people like examine the gap between who they became in order to survive and who they truly are beneath these roles and titles and expectations that they have carried for years. I remember one instance from my journey with April when she said, if you don't even know who you are and you're creating a website and a TED talk and a book, you're just decorating that little empty room that you have because you don't even know what you're doing. So that did stay with me. Her TED Talk, The Risk of Being Unknown, it does challenge audiences to confront the fear of being fully seen and explores how authenticity becomes possible only when we examine these stories and survival strategies during our lives. Like vulnerability is to Brené Brown, I feel authenticity is to April Martini, and she's going to give us some very insightful comments on authenticity. And today I have her. So, formally, April, welcome to Soulful Conversations with Madhuri.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, you are welcome. And I want to talk to you to begin with about um, tell us who April is and a brief comment on your journey so far. We'll start
Sure.
with that.
Sure. From a small town and wasn't ready to handle life yet, so I joined the army. And that I was escaping some rough life in childhood, and the army gave me a purpose. It gave me an identity. It gave me something to cling on to. It gave me structure, which was something at 18 that I needed. So that's where I started, and I learned a lot about myself and the world during those 6 years. And then I feel like, the military is one of those jobs that if you aren't in love with it anymore, you probably shouldn't do it. So I stepped away. It wasn't for me anymore. I learned lots of lessons there. I learned a lot of things about myself, like I said. And then I went into corporate America, where I continued to grow and climb and learn different things about myself and the world around me and people. And then decided I was no longer feeling challenged and I was no longer feeling impactful in a way that made me feel good. So I stepped away and decided to use all of my experiences and all of my life lessons to start a speaking practice and to start coaching and private advising, specifically women who are typically high performers and founders and high achievers, because it's typically those women who exhibit the same things that I did, hyper independence, which can sometimes be a good thing. But what I've learned is it's allowed us to hide behind that, and not be seen, not be known. So I help those women kind of feel comfortable and confident owning who they are and then deciding what they want to do with that.
Incredible, right? Incredible. The choices that you have made from army to corporate and finding your own voice and finding your own authenticity in the days of artificial intelligence, especially, right? And I think
Yeah.
coming back and offering a talk and making all those changes to bring more impact in the lives of people, incredible. Even being a veterans counselor, right, April? I do sit with a lot of veterans and one question I do ask them is Army offers you something, and that's very unique to everyone. So I want to ask you, what did the Army teach you about leadership that you carry?
My experience in the Army wasn't all roses. I believe that that's not going to be a shock to yourself or people who are listening.
Yes.
So I think the things that I learned, especially as a woman, is that you have to there's a fairness that and not a fairness like everyone deserves the medal, not that kind of fairness. But women were really not looked at as an equal player in that space. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of like the jobs that women can do versus what men can do, because there are some differences
Mm,
and that makes sense. But women were almost an inside joke when I was going through the
mm,
military. So I was in the military in the early 2000s. I joined in 2000 and I was until 2006.
mm,
So there was still, it was all before the Me Too and all of that movement. So at the time, it was still a very women aren't as strong, women aren't as capable. So what I learned was seeing people for who they are. Like, and I didn't get that necessarily when I was in the military. So now I try my best as I'm leading through things, is seeing people for who they are and not necessarily a gender or a race or a cultural background or a religious belief. So it's that I took away from that everyone has something special. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and it typically never ever revolves around the things like race, gender, backgrounds, things like that.
That's a tiny masterclass in authenticity in itself, right? I am so happy that you are a gift to the world because instead of getting bitter from those experiences that you had, you chose to see people for who they are. And I think all we want deep inside our hearts is that just see me for who I am and don't
Mhm.
judge me based on caste, color, creed, or my gender, right? So
Right.
thank you for being a gift and thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about your Baghdad experience? Like a lot of our viewers would be so interested to know how did your deployment to Baghdad shape who you are today?
So when I look back on that time, the first thing that I think about are people wouldn't ever imagine. It's some of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen in the world. The desert is incredibly beautiful, despite all of the unrest and all of the, generations and generations of arguments and deep rooted disagreements, all based out of religion. Um, I did still see the humanity in the people there. There was also some very ugly things that I saw there. So just like we see it here in America, everyone has their ugly. But I also saw the beauty. And I wouldn't call myself a religious person, but I would call myself a spiritual person. And that's been a whole other journey, and we could do a whole other podcast on
I
that.
promise you will do that.
But the call to prayer was another one. When I first got there, the Islamic call to prayer was very eerie at first. I was like, what is that? Like I just wasn't used to it. But then by the time my deployment was over, it was one of the things that I missed when I left. And it didn't really mean anything to me like it would someone who was Islamic, but it was something that I got used to. It was something that became just kind of this background noise, and you knew it was going to happen certain times of the day. And it was just this beautiful understanding that there is a subset of people who were just so dedicated to their practice and their faith that they committed to that several times a day. It was just, that was a beautiful thing for me to be a part of and to remember. Um, so those are the things that come to mind first. I actually don't even think about the ugliness. But of course, there was I still ran into some Iraqi men who saw a woman in uniform who thought that that was just wild. And especially being blonde hair and blue eyed, it was also very like, I've never seen someone like you before. So you ran into a lot of cultural differences. Women are looked at very differently over there. They don't see the blonde hair and the blue eyes and the super white skin. So that was an interesting time. And then I think about, so I was a very young, didn't have children, and I actually kind of volunteered for the deployment, which isn't something that you hear of very often. I'll back up a little bit. I was at the Pentagon, and I kind of had a feeling then that I wasn't going to stay in the military for long
Mm,
term. And I didn't feel good about getting out of the military, having not served my country in wartime. So I asked the chief of staff if he could release me from that job and put me with the next unit that was deploying. So he did. He put me with the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, and that is who I deployed with. Um, so I did that time. Um, but I also, going back to what I was saying, there were mothers that I think about now because I am now a mother. And I don't know how they were able to be away from their children because I think about that now. And there's just no way I could leave my child to do anything for any job, let alone the military in a war zone. So I think about that too. So those are some of the things I think about.
incredible. You painted a different picture about Baghdad to us, and that's the reason it's important for you to speak up because you saw those reactions and you're, in a way, teaching the world it's okay to be a woman and do anything that we want to do under the sky. So,
Mhm.
thank you for stepping up and sharing that with us. Let's go beyond the uniform now. Want to tell us a bit about your transition from the
Sure.
military to the corporate life a little bit, and then I have so much to ask you more about messages for veterans, right?
Yeah.
So, how was the transition like?
It was, when I went into the military, I was kind of running from a traumatic childhood
Hmm,
experience. And the
hmm,
military, like I said, gave me this identity
hmm,
and it really played well with what I needed. So it felt good to be in a structured, disciplined environment where people expected very specific things from me.
hmm,
So when I left the military, I did feel a little lost for a while because I didn't have to show up to formation in the morning. I wasn't required to do PT anymore. I wasn't required, like, there was no one constantly checking up on me and asking me where I was, like, on the clock in the morning and all of my lunch breaks or time to go home at dinner time or the flag going up and flag coming down and all. It was just all the tradition and the structure. It goes all the way back to, it goes always back to that. I felt lost in a way because there wasn't a lot of expectation of me. It was more up to myself what I was gonna do and how I was going to um, show up in the world. So I kind of floundered for the first year. I was in and out of like a retail job at first before I
hmm,
actually hit corporate America. For that first year, worked at J.C. Penney for a little while and then at K Jewelers for a little while. And then I finally landed into corporate America. And then that felt a little more, gave me a little more structure, a little more to hold on to. But it was tough at first because I felt, and I still identify with a lot of the things that the military did give me. Um, so I can see how people who have spent much longer than 6 years have such a hard time transitioning from the military into a civilian space. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What are some signs, April, that someone is still operating from old wounds rather than the present day truth? The reason I ask is because you had a transition, but are there some times one has to be vigilant about, hey, I'm operating from an old wound than my present reality? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think for myself,
Hmm,
I never really felt settled.
hmm,
There were certain things that how I would respond to life that felt natural to me, but then life still wasn't going how I thought. I felt I'm very disciplined and I am trying my best to manage my time, but life still isn't working out the way that I thought it would if I adopted these habits. And so I really had to sit with myself, and I've done a lot of work with professionals to get me to a place where I recognized that while some of the things that I was adhering to were bits and pieces of myself,
hmm,
a lot of what I was operating from was a story that someone else gave me. So in this case, my father gave me a lot of really negative
hmm,
sound bites.
hmm,
Like I said in my talk, he would tell me that I was stupid and that I would not amount to anything and that I was an ugly woman. no one would ever love me. And so a lot of my life choices spun around that narrative for so long. Relationships weren't working. I would try hobbies and then I would quit them. And I would feel like, well, my dad was right. I was going to be a quitter anyway. So this must just
Mhm.
be how it goes. Um, so I think when you're feeling this deep sense of unsettled, then there's something just not resonating for you, and you're likely operating from someone else's narrative. And maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a societal norm that you feel like you're supposed to be performing for, but there is something under there that is not yours, and you're trying to hold on to it like it is.
Yeah. I never felt settled. I think that's a big precursor that I have for all of my audiences today. If you ever feel you're not settled, then look deeper. There is some other story, narrative going on. Such a huge reminder to all the parents and future parents that the seeds that you sow in a child's head becomes their self-fulfilling prophecies in the future. So it's
Yes.
so important to talk kindly and with compassion to children. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I
Yeah.
want to move and talk about the TED Talk now.
Yeah.
I was there to witness it, and
Mhm.
you were incredible. The audience had a ravishing review of who you were and what you spoke, and I was fortunate enough to be there to witness that. So, what inspired this TED Talk? Help us with the story.
Yeah, so I dropped some very hard truths from my life in that story. And it was to speak on the TEDx stage was number one, a bucket list item for me. So I always knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't necessarily know what I was going to say until this time came around. We were given our theme of all of us. And I thought to myself, how can I make this about all of us? And how can I make it about the collective if it's going to be also very rooted in a personal story for me? And I just thought, if all of us were more authentic to who we really are, and we were allowed to be seen for all the things that we are, what a more beautiful community we could start building with each other. And so I built it around, that was my motivator, is that I want people to hear it and feel that they have some hope. They can take a next step forward on figuring out who they are, getting very curious, and then feeling confident and comfortable in owning that piece of themselves. Um, and then for my selfish reason, I would say I wanted to stand in my light and I wanted to speak my truth. And a lot of what I had to say, I used to be very embarrassed and in shame about. And I got over that and I wanted to stand in that space and say it out loud so that I could, what you say in the light is no longer going to hold you back. So I said it in the light and here we are. um, I realized that there are going to be a lot of people, not just women, who would hear that TEDx and they would feel seen and they would feel like, wow, I am not the only one that dealt with this or that. Because you don't have to identify with my entire story. There's a lot of bits and pieces in there that I talk about. I talk about a very traumatic childhood. I talk about being married 4 times. And that's not something to super be proud of, but it's something that's honest and raw. And I go through why that happened. And it was a lot of it was because I was performing for a man who built this negative perception of me. And I allowed that narrative to drive me from relationship to relationship. And when I wasn't allowing myself to be seen and known, I was picking the wrong men for all the wrong reasons. And then I was turning around and running from them because I didn't want to be seen.
Yeah, yeah. And it completely justifies the interactions you had with your father and the whole healing process. And it takes guts to stand and own the story. So, in a way, as they say, charity begins at home. So, you are teaching us how to be authentic right from your own stories. There is something very cool about authenticity, right? The moment you feel like I am authentic to who I am, you breathe.
Yes.
Right? such a sigh of relief that this is who I am and I'm unique, I'm mad, I'm funny, and it's okay. It's okay. So I really appreciate you sharing that background behind the TED Talk. I'm going to connect this to our veteran audience here. So, what does the risk of being unknown mean for veterans specifically, right? If you have some tips around that, that would be
Sure.
wonderful.
Yeah. So I think a lot, it's true for me, and I do believe that this is true for a lot of veterans. The military does give you this built-in identity, and that is the type of job and the type of identity that it's a very strong identity, as you know. To be in the military, you have to be a lot of things, and you have to present a lot of things, and in a lot of ways, it is a bit of a performance to be in the military. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance that comes with it, and there's a lot of visual that comes with that job. And I believe that as veterans, we become this hardened, hyper independent, I talked about earlier, person in order to perform that job well. And then we carry it home with us. And when we carry it home with us, that's where we start to fall down a little bit, because it's the people who we are the closest with that end up being hurt by that identity. We being hyper independent, being strong all the time, being told not to show a ton of emotion, being told to swallow the whatever it is that you're dealing with and put on that front that you're a strong person and you can do anything. Um, that doesn't do anything good for your relationships at home. So I think that that's where there's some issue there. Spouses end up hitting a lot of barriers to communication and intimacy, and they feel very much left on the outside and not pulled into the inside. And I think, you know, I had been married to a soldier before, and I've seen both sides, and I have friends who are married to the military, so I've seen it from their perspective too. And the spouse really just wants to be included so that they can feel like they are helpful for you, that they are a safe space for you to come home to. And I feel like the military does a great job of building us up into this very strong identity, and then it just doesn't serve its purpose at home.
Such a profound message, such a profound message. I'm going to listen to this again and again. Thank you for sharing and share with all the veteran clients that I meet, right? Also, tell me about that one message from your TED Talk that you have for veterans that you hope every veteran hears, right? Help us with that.
So from the TED Talk for veterans, I would say um, it's okay to let that wall down. So I call it the armor in my TEDx, that we armor up when we are, you know, trying to do anything for the promotion or the deployment coming up, or um, going to a new training, whatever it is, we armor up so that we can protect ourselves in those moments and not, it's almost like Teflon, it doesn't stick, it just bounces right off of you, and we build that armor up. And I think for veterans, they almost need the permission. I feel like it's permission to put it down and to allow those in your inner circle to get closer, accept help from them. I think, I talked a lot about people a lot of times are drowning and just need help, and they won't even ask for it because that armor says, no, you're not allowed to ask for
Mm,
help.
mm,
So I would say, I get that you can't let everyone in, but that inner circle, those people that you've identified that have your back, the ones that love you most,
mm.
find a way to put that armor down and let them in.
Right, right. And working with veterans, I attest to what April said. I can tell everyone listening to this, it's not easy to win their trust. It takes some time because for them, they have walls and armors for a reason.
Mhm.
But if you stay consistent and authentic, then they will let you in. And once they let you in, you become a part of their inner circle and then you serve them consistently. So, yeah, with you, absolutely with you on that message.
I would
Moving,
say,
oh, Say that
Oh,
again.
sorry. I was going to say, I would say that staying curious as to why you are the way that you are, and allowing the people around you to also stay curious, is another thing that I would put out. Like as you're putting that armor down, a lot of times you just need to be curious around why is it that I'm responding the way that I'm responding, or why is it that my spouse or my child or my parent or my friend is asking what they're asking or responding to me in the way that they're responding. It takes a lot of curiosity and a lot of awareness to allow that armor to come down.
Truth, absolute truth.
Mhm.
And now moving away from veterans, I want to talk to you about your forthcoming book, Authentic to What? Why is authentic to what such an important question?
It goes back to what we've been talking about, which is there's typically a narrative that we're all performing to that we thought was who we were supposed to be. But actually, when you get down to it and you start to question, well, whose voice is it that I hear when I think of I'm not worthy of something? And for me, it was my father's voice. And once you kind of pinpoint that voice, then it becomes like one of those things that you can't unsee. You're like, oh, so that wasn't me actually. That was somebody else giving me a story that I actually don't have to listen to. It's not mine. Um, and so I was, I've been in several networking rooms and conferences over the last 2 years since I left corporate America, and every single one of them Madhuri has said, be yourself, be authentic, be who you are, own it. That's how you build your business. That's how you become a better person. And I agree with them. But then just a couple of months ago, I remember sitting at a light in my car and I was just waiting for the light to turn. And I thought, but authentic to what? Because I thought authentic for a really long time. But then when I got down to it, I wasn't. I was being authentic to someone else's story of me. So it's asking that deeper question. Are you being authentic, or are you authentic to something else? Again, a societal norm, a story someone else has given you. Because I don't think that everyone knows that.
That is a double-edged question, right? One is it reflects on authentic to what? Like, are you authentic to something that is misaligned with you? But once you know that you're authentic to something that's misaligned with you, the second question is now you become authentic to what? So it's a
Right.
double-fold question. I'm glad you're addressing that because it just takes care of the past and the future. And I have to share this, right? So, this story that you had heard from your father, which was your voice for such a long time, in
Mhm.
this forthcoming book that I'm writing, You Are Not Your Chaos. That's the chaos can be replaced with your story. Like, you are not your story. That's what I'm reflecting on. It's so powerful that you shared that story. It keeps me inspired to continue to do the work. But I can't wait for authentic to what? Because authenticity is something that we have slowly forgotten because so many voices and so many stories have muddled our minds right now. And I
Yes.
think this is stripping away all those stories and the noise to be authentic to who you are. So that is incredible.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, is there a story or lesson in that book that veterans will specially connect with, right? Does anything come to your mind?
That veterans will especially connect with. Um, I think so. I will go through my own methodology, which I call the Martini method, in the book. And there is a section where once you've identified that voice that you've been listening to, that you've been kind of authentic to, you then need to take a look at the damage that it's caused. And I think that that's a really big eye opener. To see how it may be affecting that spouse or that child in your life, or maybe it's your friends or your siblings. It's those close relationships, seeing the damage And then I think the next one, because that one's very eye-opening, I think the second one I would tell you is when you get to meet yourself in this methodology. So once you've identified the voice and you kind of take a look at what that voice has done, the damage around you, then you get to move into this space where you get to meet who you actually are. And it's where you get to question everything. You get curious about your habits, your patterns, your triggers, why you say certain things, what makes you respond that way. And I think it's a really beautiful process if you are in the right headspace to do it, because not everyone is. So you need to be in the right headspace. But when you are ready to meet who you really are, I think that's a very beautiful thing for veterans to do.
Mhm. Here is a follow-up question I have for you, right? What if, and this is for everyone, veterans, civilians, what if you don't like the authentic self that you have met?
So there are parts of myself that I didn't like that
Mm,
I met along the way. And it's the beautiful thing about finally getting honest with who you are is
mm,
that then you get to change those things. You get to make a
mm,
decision. Am I
mm,
going to continue to be that person now that I know that she's there? Or am I going to, now that I see it, I can't ignore it anymore? Am I going to do something about it? And so, for an example, for myself, my husband and I, we would get in, arguments from time to time. All couples do. And sometimes I am just very direct, to the point, non emotional. And he saw it as very aggressive sometimes, or almost from a mean spirited place. And that's just not who I am to my core. And I know that. But when I was able to strip it down and see it for what it was, even though my intent wasn't to be an ugly person, sometimes it came across that way. And I had to own how that was making other people feel, even if it wasn't my intention. Um, so I've been able now to still be myself because I'm also not the one who's going to be flowery with my and sugarcoat everything. So that's also not who I am.
mm.
But I was able to take a look at that trait of mine and pivot in a way where I could still be direct, but in a more respectful way. So I think you get to decide. Once you finally know who you are, then you have all of these decisions. You get to keep those traits or you get to decide that that's not who I want to be anymore. And you can't change something that you aren't aware of. So if you're just rolling around in life refusing to look at yourself, you're going to continue to drag along all those bad habits that you have.
Yeah. That is so profound, absolutely profound. In psychotherapy, we use something known as paths work. It's a part of the internal family
Mhm.
system. And what you just spoke about was the paths work. When you meet your authentic self, your whole self is not something that you will dislike, but there will be some parts you love, some parts you hate, and only when you meet them with authenticity is when you'll be able to change them. So you've just given us a masterclass on from being bitter to better right now.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
it works so beautifully well because you have done it personally. You've
yeah.
changed the voice, you have changed the narrative, and now you're helping others change the narrative. So that is incredible, incredible. The veteran population is so close and so dear to my heart, April, that I want to ask you just one more question about how to help veterans here. You found an authentic purpose. What would you tell a veteran who either feels stuck or some of them feel disconnected from purpose? Like when I was in military, I had a purpose, but I've been searching for my purpose since then. Since you have found yours, what is a message that you have for them?
I think there are two things to think about and consider to get to that place. One is to really take a look at your values and like your whole value system. So I have a chart. I'm sure as a therapist you do too. You can
Mhm,
look at your values,
mhm,
and there's a lot of them that I don't think people realize how many there are. So I think taking a look at your values and understanding what your values actually are, and then understanding your why. why do you want to have a purpose? Why do you want to have, why are those values important to you? And I think when you start to see them on paper and start to ask yourself and get curious about the why behind them, the purpose starts to unsurface itself. And so I think that's where I would start with.
Right, right. As the Japanese call it, the Aikigai, to find your purpose, and the values exercise always helps. Thank you for sharing that. I do have a rapid fire for you. You've already shared some beautiful stuff. So, just a rapid fire, which is one book that changed your life.
Oh, goodness. I would say, um, I'm going to say the Bible. And the reason why is probably not what people think. So, as I said, I am not religious, but I am spiritual. And I grew up Southern Baptist, and then I converted to Catholicism when I was in the military. I was really drawn to like the traditional piece of that. They have lots of rituals and very traditional, and I loved that. But then as I got a little older, lived in a couple of different countries, saw a lot of different cultures, I realized that we're all talking about a higher power. We're not denying the fact that there's a higher power. We're just calling it something different. All of us are calling it something different. So I would say that getting in touch with parts of the Bible allowed me to question how I felt about religion. And it was allowing, and then it allowed me to get to a place where I felt most alive, which is a more spiritual, connected to nature type space.
Definitely helps us go back to one of the most profound spiritual texts ever written. So, thank you for quoting that here. And one army lesson from the military that you will carry forever.
And I will carry forever. I think it goes back to people. Every one of us are beautiful and special and incredible for all of the pieces that we are. I saw it on the streets of South Korea. I saw it on the streets of Baghdad, Iraq. I saw it in DC when I was stationed there and everywhere in between. We are all so much more alike than we are not alike. So I think that I was exposed to so many cultures and so many people that allowed me to see just how beautiful the world really is, despite a lot of the ugliness.
You also tell us, what is the biggest misconception about authenticity?
The biggest misconception. Um, Trying to find it on social media is what I'm going to say.
Mm.
And thinking that people are living authentically on their highlight reel. I would say that that's such a just because someone is maybe crying on the internet or trying to tell you all of their stories on the internet doesn't mean that that's an authentic existence. That's still very curated space. So I would say that it's an inner job. It's not something that you should outsource to your internet besties or your favorite influencer.
And the risk of outsourcing gets very real when you are in a dip moment. That's when you start comparing and finding out who is doing what, and you realize everyone's life is perfect. And I think everyone's life is perfect on the internet,
It is
not
on the
when you
internet.
scratch the surface, right? So, with you. And tell me about, what is giving you hope right now in life.
I would say people willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work. I'm seeing more and more people go back to that space. I think COVID did a number on us as a human race, and it forced us all to go inward. And I think a lot of people finally sat with themselves and realized something has to give, something's got to change, whether it had been a relationship or a job. I think a lot of people got very up close and personal with things that they were able to kind of look away from for so long. That time in our life forced us to see things that maybe we weren't seeing before. And I think we're now coming out of that time, and people are getting more and more comfortable with being being ready for the real and the raw and the authentic.
Right, right. So, April, how can our listeners connect with you? Where can we find you? Where can we find about the book? Tell us
Sure.
more about how can we connect with you?
Yep. So I'm on LinkedIn, April Martini on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram. So that would be April T Martini. And then my TEDx is on YouTube. You just have to search my name, April Martini, and you'll find it.
Here we go. Just search April Martini after you listen to this, okay? But April, such an honor to have you on the show, and you've taught us a lot of lessons on different life experiences, military, your life, and want us to believe that you can still be authentic and still be accepted, and you don't have to live an inauthentic life. So I just
Absolutely.
want to thank you again for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.